My name's Gavin. I'm just going to spend the next sort of 20 minutes just running through a little bit about how we've been using FME to do a lot of API integration, use it as sort of an API sort of middleware tool, and also just go through a couple of use cases that some of our customers have been using. We're seeing an increasing number of customers now starting to play with web services, whether it's accessing business systems or actually pulling data down, and FME provides a fantastic tool for actually letting you do a lot of this. So you've probably guessed from the accent, we're from the UK, we're one of the distributors out there. So really, why do you want to look at APIs? APIs provide a really easy way to access data, to start to pull content down, and it's actually really more about automation. They're really enabling things to be automated and to actually rapidly access data, be able to pull that content through and easily manipulate it. So all an API is really is just an interface onto a platform, and you can then actually just query that platform and just control it programmatically. And by changing how you're calling it, it's going to very much determine what you get back. So you can pass in the right parameters, and you'll get the right data back, hopefully. Typically, though, it's these days when we talk about an API from a lot of the web stuff, it's all going to be done over HTTP. So it's all HTTP messages, normally sort of through a GET request or a POST request. That will then give you back a defined sort of structure of your data, and typically they're in JSON format or XML for DOM. Increasingly, though, we're seeing more and more of them are moving away from an XML structure and probably embracing JSON. I think JSON's very much more user-friendly when it comes to in terms of integration into websites, some sort of more web applications, so a lot of services are standing up and using JSON. And FME has great support for both of those formats. It makes it really easy to start to build a request, post it in, and then handle that data. And actually, the really fun bit becomes when you've actually got the data into FME and the things you can do with it. There's a real sea of these things. It's a term that sort of the UK government's been throwing around a little bit, saying there's a sea of APIs, and what they're trying to do is get all of their sort of developers, when they're building websites, they're building infrastructure, to actually really do that around APIs, to make sure that every service has got APIs that you can connect to, pull information from, push information back into. And the idea is to make it really, really easy for sort of government services especially to actually start to talk to one another and to be agile and react. You're not stuck in a big stovepipe you can't change for 10 years. It makes things a lot easier to pull out one little component, change it, and push things through. They're also really a way for you to interact with either a customer's products and services, or you for actually to provide to customers and to customers a way of actually starting to interact with your content and your data and your system and your services. And there's just a really easy way for software to communicate and share. But actually, it's not really so much of it's more about a new way of doing business. It's actually starting to really enable people to quickly access other content and to publish it up. You're not having to burn DVDs, ship those DVDs out, wait 6 weeks for that stuff to arrive somewhere, unload it, compressed, load into a system. You can just literally access it, pull the information back that you want, and push it through. In things like with FME Server, you can set the schedules up, run those schedules on demand, and you start to really easily access content down, update some records, and do that on a nightly kind of basis. And actually, it's also starting to change the way you work with providers, because you're building a system and then you're now dependent on that API. So you have a relationship with that provider. We're working with a customer at the moment. They want to build out an entire infrastructure and alert notification service based on one of the Environment Agency's APIs at home. So they're now going to build a commercial product off that, and they now have to start to think, well, this is a free service we're getting, but we're making money off that. How do we start to work that relationship with that particular provider? Is there start to be a revenue share coming back, or is it something that they need to then invest in the marketing to make sure that government can see the benefit for some of the open APIs they're standing up and start to see the value in some of these services? But really, FME provides a fantastic tool for actually accessing all of these and starting to interact with all of these different services. Very much sits in the middle, and you can sort of see the types of services you've got there. You've got things like data storage with sort of Google Drive, Dropbox, and Box. You've got Salesforce, MailChimp, Twitter. You can all start to interact with all these different services, pull content down, push them up, and that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. You can use it as a consumer. So FME is a fantastic consumer of API data, as you said. If you ever use the trains in the UK, they never run on time. So I've built a quick web service in FME that just monitors to see if my train home of an evening is going to be on time, to see whether I need to leg it out of the office quickly, or actually I haven't got to worry because the train's late, therefore if I'm running late in the meeting, it's not going to be a problem. So we use the HTTP caller. We can just call onto that web service, check to find out whether the data or train's on time. If it is, it doesn't really worry about it, but if it's not, it can Slack me then and say, right, there's a problem, you've got an extra 10 minutes, you don't need to leg it to the station. Now, with all the sort of smart wearable technology, FME sits there and does that, but it just pushes that straight to my watch. I can be sat in a meeting, and it's really just a quick way of starting to pull content and things through. But conversely, FME can stand these web services up, so you can actually start to provide the REST web services. So this is a really basic website that we built, but it's just driven from FME web services, just providing JSON data into the graphs, GeoJSON into the mapping content, and it's a really quick and easy thing to build these, stand them up, and then let other people start to leverage the content coming out. But obviously you can do an awful lot with the integration side of things. This is just an example we've been doing internally, because Dale's always said about eating your own dog food, and it's a really good term of saying, well, if you can actually use your own products, start to find out how they go together, you can start to find out all the pain points that our customers are going to experience, so we can start to help them and build up some use cases that they can understand and how they can use the data sets. So we have 3 different internal business systems. We use Open CRM, we have Zendesk, which is our customer support system, and we use MailChimp, which is the ones that pushes all those really annoying emails out to you guys that will spam your inboxes all the time. Those 3 systems don't really talk to each other. They're all completely stovepiped away, but all 3 of them provide APIs. So what we can start to do is using some workspaces that aren't actually that horrible when you get into them, pull content down from some of those things, and start to reconcile. So if we've got customer information in our support system, does that tie up with the information that we've got in our CRM system and that we're going to start to email people out with? Reconcile all that information. FME provides a very basic part in terms of just easy access to those web services, but it has all the other power around matching those records, cleansing those records, all the sort of normal standard data cleansing exercises you go through. You can just build that into that workspace, and at the other end of the workspace, you just start to push that content back into REST APIs to actually write into the different systems. So you can then start to quickly synchronize all of your data. And it says, you can validate our data, we can ensure we've got a consistency, and we're starting to get what they sort of term this common operating picture. It knows that we've got the same records in all 3 systems that we can start to manage. And it's all just done through simple APIs, but FME very much sits at the core of that and enables that whole process. Without FME, it's a lot of exports, sticking it into Excel, somebody's trying to cleanse it all up. It just doesn't really become scalable or efficient. With FME, suddenly it's just an automated process that happens every night. And we've been working with some of the local authorities in the United Kingdom, looking at very kind of similar things with them. So we've got a customer here in Calderdale. They have a lot of flooding. They're very sort of big areas, lots of very large rivers, can have quite a large impact. So they have to maintain a list of vulnerable people that they may need to get to if there's a big flood event, so they can actually send the right kind of response, the right council services, but also the right emergency services to the right locations. So they need to kind of know where the flood impacts are going to be, but was currently a process that was very manual intensive. It was taking quite a while to do this each week, and actually it can all be done very much automatically. So they're now starting to use FME to pull flood data down from the Environment Agency's API, so they can start to actually look at the alerts, start to be predictive about what's going to happen, match that to the actual flood zones, match that to their at-risk register. Again, they're just talking to their own internal customer CRM systems APIs to pull that content down, and then now they're just automatically generating that report each week, and it's saving them a couple of hours a week, which doesn't sound like a huge lot of time, but actually when you've got really tight budgets and people are really, really overworked, that suddenly frees them up to do an awful lot more useful, more valuable stuff, and that process just can sit there in the background and run. And similarly, they've been looking at their open data portal technology. They have to provide now under UK legislations all the open data, and they're required to keep that portal current. They're putting more and more data sets in there. They've got over 200 at the moment, but they want to grow that out with more of the council's data. But again, it's a really manual process. It becomes quite complicated to manage. So they're starting to use FME to actually manage all of that process, to automatically pull content from their existing systems through a set of web APIs, create the data sets, upload that onto Amazon S3 so they can store the data there, register that through, and then just basically automate the whole process. And again, it becomes very, very simple. Here they're just scanning over a file path to find where new data sets have been dropped in, creating some attribution, uploading to S3, and then they're just using the HTTP caller with a post request to say, right, this is the information that we've uploaded, this is the links, create a new record, associate this data link with this record, and then email that out as an update status to those people who are interested, so they can say, right, this is the data sets that have been updated, and then that data becomes available on their website instantly. We're playing around with some of the testing, and they created about 5 or 6 data sets on their live service because they forgot to switch them over and just didn't realize, but it's so quick to actually start to push that kind of content through. And then you can start to see, obviously, they have a nice open data portal, but conversely, this starts to then create an even wider ecosystem because they're now standing this up, but they're then providing through this open data portal their own APIs. So you can then start to create an entire ecosystem where we can pull that data back down into other services. And here we're just pulling down some of that data that's been just posted up, pulling it in through, we're just dropping it into the data inspector. It's just grit bin location, so it's you can go and chuck grit or salt wherever there's snow and ice. It's a particularly high and hilly area. So it becomes a really easy way with the APIs to start to chain these things together and actually generate some real value out for downstream consumers of the service. They've also been doing things similar to what we were doing internally with looking at updating their customer contact center. They were having real problems with the queuing system that they were using. It was a bespoke in-house bit of software they'd written. Wasn't really that robust. They were losing a lot of messages. They'd have customers phoning them up saying, well, I called you up 2 weeks ago to come and collect the bins. You've still not been here. Where is it? And they go back through and find all that contact information hadn't been passed from their CRM system for the customer contact through to the actual team that's tasked out to go and collect the bins. The message has just been lost. So what they were hoping for, and what they started to use, is to get FME server to sit in the middle of that, listen to the queues from the Oracle CRM system, start to actually then say, right, this is the right information, we can pass it into the right messaging SIP bodies, and then post that off to their contractor API, so it goes into the contractor system, and then basically if there's any failure or they lose any messages coming through, they can actually start to generate all the alerts and the notifications that you get with FME server to actually start to tell people that something's happened and they can go and investigate. Though actually what they're finding is the FME platform is so stable, they're not really having to worry about the erroring side. It's just all done through. And the fun one with this one, it was all in XML. It was SOAP. If you ever try to use a SOAP web service, they are generally horrible. The hardest part about actually building this solution was not the technology or even looking at the API side of things. It was purely trying to find the correct message body that the service would actually respond with, because the documentation doesn't match what reality actually expects. So there's a lot of fiddling around, but once you've cracked that part, the actual workflow becomes very simple. You just create your XML template, you can push that through the HTTP caller, get the response back, you can start to process it, and then push that content through. And actually, if you start with some of these, we can actually take from just being a simple workspace, and where we've got multiple methods and things we might want to call with that API, we can actually wrap that up into a custom transformer. So if you've not seen Don's Little Bits custom transformer on the FME Hub, it's a really good example of how you can start to interact with APIs. So it's a really good one to start to have a look at and actually understand underneath how you can start to make a very, very simple transformer, but actually deliver something that's really powerful and very flexible. And we've had another customer down in London who's been looking at using FME Cloud to actually drive some of their web-based APIs. And what they've got is an awful lot of forms to do with similar kind of customer contact information. They want to create cases, log documents and things through. But what they want to do is actually start to fill in all of these web forms. And those web forms, all the information that they normally populate with that is stored in a back-end database system that's provided by some of their different existing business systems, and they have their own APIs, but they're not particularly flexible or easy to deal with. So they're essentially using FME as an abstraction layer to start to say, well, look, we'll build a very, very simple workspace with FME that makes a very clean API out to the web developers, and FME will handle all the complexity talking to the multiple business systems underneath and pulling that information together to give them a very simple API to work against. Yeah, they have to go off to quite a few different systems to tidy it up. It's possibly slightly more than 10 transformers in there for them. Again, it's kind of one of the things, they've been building it out and making it work, and now they're going back and actually trying to refine some of this down to reduce some of the number of transformers. So they're busy working away on it. Again, it's just simply providing HTTP forms or web forms. FME's calling those through the APIs. They're using published parameters within FME server just to actually then pull the information in to build the XML queries. Those XML queries get passed to the back office system, and then there's a nice clean JSON response that goes out for the web developers to then just load that information into. And we've had another customer, Surrey Heath. You may have had a couple of articles up on the FME blog. They've really embraced FME Cloud. They're a huge fan of this. They've been playing around with it massively in terms of starting to put a lot of their business processes in, and then linking that cloud technology with some of their other technology and web sites, and actually starting to drive through quite a lot of business savings for the organization. One of the things they've been doing is looking at rate inspections. They have basically people, or tax inspectors, have to go out and check to see that if you build a property or they have a property on file, is it actually being taxed at the right level? So they'll go through and say, well, okay, that property was built at this particular time, therefore it should be worth this much. And if it was a new property, the UK has a very strange way of doing it. We go look at how much it would have been worth in 1990 or something to actually derive the valuation. But it's a completely manual process. So they have a lot of paper form filling, there's a lot of chance for error, and they wanted to get rid of that whole process and really automate it. So they used a third-party mobile application that allows to do all that sort of form filling on the handheld device, which is Fulcrum. But Fulcrum provides a wide range of APIs. So they were like, well, that's fantastic. We'll just get FME Cloud to talk to those APIs, pull that content down. They can push that into their own internal SQL servers. And if there are updates internally, they push that back the other way, and they can push that straight back into the Fulcrum platform. And then the inspector teams have the most current and up-to-date information. So there's no more paper form filling. They can put all the usual sort of validation and integrity checking around it. But it's all being really enabled by the APIs, and FME just sat in the middle, handling all the content as it moves around. So you can kind of see it's a relatively basic system, but it's doing exactly what they need it to do. And rather than some form that's going to get all wet and things, because it always rains at home, it's now really simple, digital. They can just click through. There's a lot more validation and control on the information, but it's, again, very simply just fed off all of the web services. They've also been using a little bit for some of the historic planning. So they have historic planning applications that have been put in. They're trying to make those more available. They're trying to make all of their planning data available through their own web APIs. So if you're a user of that data, rather than trying to have to phone the local authority up, ask them to try and get the data, search through some horrible website, you can do it all programmatically and start to pull that content through. So they're very much starting to build out quite a strong platform with it, and they're using FME to actually drive a lot of the process in the background. They're embracing the whole cloud concept. So if you've seen any of Don's talks, they're very much into Docker at the moment, rolling out Docker. They've got FME there. They're using Slack for kind of internal feedback and monitoring. And then they've embraced the whole sort of Amazon Web Services platform at the top there. But again, it's just all of the information is just going from API to API through very simple sort of JSON messages, linked it through. They're using some cloud storage to store the historic record cards. So they've been using FME to load the content up to the record cards, but also then just pushing in updates through the box APIs and things as well. So yeah, they've uploaded something like 18,000 history cards, and they've obviously been building that out, and they're keeping that address data and loading the address data up nightly. So it's actually sat there just each night, quickly refreshes it, and they've automated an entire process that used to be a very manual, quite labor-intensive thing. So really, in summary, FME loves APIs. It's fantastically easy to actually start to pull content down from there, manipulate it, and then just push stuff up. You know, it's kind of, we've had readers and writers for years and years and years. Everybody's been very happy with different formats, but actually as we kind of move more and more into a web and cloud interface, those readers and writers are disappearing. We're starting to, it's more about talking to different web services, what those formats the web service returns, but you still process it in exactly the same way. So all of that translation, the validation, the quality control, all the really fun stuff that sits in the middle, you can still do, and then you just push that data back out to the next API and start to chain them through. So they're really a strong tool for providing integration, and FME just loves automating stuff. It becomes so easy to start to automate things. You can just throw this up on FME server, set some schedules, and it just manages and runs with things. And it really is starting to drive out a lot of efficiency to these customers. They're all under incredibly tough budget constraints, and actually any time that they can find is a real bonus for actually starting to deliver improved services and improved content. So yeah, that's it. So if anybody has any questions. Yeah, it's the hardest part is finding the XML template structure. So obviously you have the standard SOAP body that you can take and add in, And then you just find, as long as the documentation is clear about how it should be built, you can just use the XML templater, create a templated version of the particular SOAP request you want to do, and then just make that, use that as part of that request. So it becomes really, really simple. So there's a little bit of time finding that information and setting it up, but once you've done it, actually using it is incredibly easy.
Did you ever try to build a custom thing around that, or you just end up doing this, what you said, it's manual?
We started to have a look at it, so we're just working on that one at the moment for them to try and tidy it up, because they've been trying to actually just prove the end-to-end process. So obviously the next thing is to start to build those sorts of usability kind of things into it to make it simpler. But once you've defined all of those different requests, you know, it's just a natural next extension to build sort of that into a custom transformer for that particular platform.
And did you happen to try to use Python caller to do the same stuff, like using scripting, or were you able to just use the built-in, like the transformer?
No, all the built-in transformers were more than sufficient for what we were trying to do. We've used the Python caller to do those sorts of things in the past, but it's just so easy now with the sort of transformers, like the HTTP caller and all the XML, JSON sort of templater ones now, just to do it all just within the workspace.
So Gavin, do you think it would be worthwhile for SAFE to invest in something that, like a transformer that would make it very easy to post to a web form? Or are web forms a thing of the past and REST APIs are going to overwhelm them?
Ooh, I think everybody seems to be moving to using the APIs, because then for the front end you can start to decouple that away from the back end processes, so it becomes sort of a microservices concept, I think. So you can just, the more services you stand up, the easier it is for the developers just to talk to those services.
It's almost a legacy question. There will be a handful of things out there that still require forms to be
Yep.
filled in.
Yeah, so I think I don't think it would be a bad thing to have. I think it's just,
Well, Microsoft still has a lot of SOAP-based web service, and I'm finding like all the application that I support, line of business applications, all the APIs are SOAP-based. So,
Yeah.
and FME, sometimes hard time working with FME.
yeah, Oracle's the same. I think a lot of their APIs, a lot of their older platforms are again all SOAP-based, so,
Yeah.
which was their customer's problem. They had that challenge of trying to just find the documentation, and once they got through that, actually it wasn't particularly difficult to use the SOAP ones. And actually that rail example as well is another SOAP-based service.
There was some kind of SOAP sender and receiver or SOAP something transformer I remember rolling by. None of you have ever used it?
We did try it, but it didn't quite do it, and I think it's disappeared, so I'm sure, because we were looking for it for the other day.
Maybe that's part of the VR contest.
Yeah. Yep.
Any other questions for Gavin?
When APIs return, how do you page through? Have you had any experience having to page through the results of an API?
Yeah, our customer support system uses that page-through technology. It will return the first 1,000 or however many records. So we've basically just used a custom transformer to loop through, and that one gives you almost like the next URL at the bottom.
Okay.
So you just pull it out, and then you can just pass that through. And we're just within that custom transformer, it'll just sit there and iterate through those requests, so it returns all of the records.
Awesome. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you.